I want to share a few thoughts on the genesis of this conference before I introduce tonight's speakers. The conference theme grew out of a class that I developed here at AU with the same title, American Jews and Israel, A Complicated Relationship. As if it were not enough to navigate multiple identities as a member of a minority in the United States, I have spent my life balancing between and observing differences between the American Jewish community and Israel. This went far beyond politics. My parents' bookshelf boasted the obligatory mid-century texts of American Zionist myth-making, like Leon Uris's Exodus. And at summer camp, I used camp Hebrew, Chader Ochel, Tzrif, Shiron, for all sorts of objects and locations, while my Israeli friends only wanted to listen to American music. Several years later, living in Israel, I confused the daylights out of secular kibbutznikim who were accustomed to seeing religion as a black and white divide and didn't understand a brand of American Judaism in which I kept kosher and yet wore a bikini to the beach. And on are you religious or are you not religious? I don't understand. On a more serious note, I vividly remember squirming as other kids in grade school asked the insidious question, if Israel and the US had a war, whose side would you fight on? Just curious, how many people around my age were asked that? Yeah, a bunch. Those confusing, sometimes amusing, often frustrating moments and outright loyalty challenges have only become more intense in recent years, but they are not new. American Jews have been getting to know Israeli society for over a century now, starting before the creation of the state, bringing Israeli art and music into their homes, sending money in response to crises, and navigating charges of dual loyalty, while Israelis have embraced much of American culture and have dealt with American politicians for decades. They have also been profoundly influenced by North American olim, or immigrants, who have become leaders on both ends, far ends, of the social and political spectrum in Israel, from founding organizations for women's rights, the environment, religious pluralism, LGBTQ rights, and more, to forming a significant percentage of settlers on the West Bank. It is this complexity that we discuss here tonight and tomorrow by bringing together the voices of historians, journalists, novelists, pollsters, and others. The relationship that we address is colorful, multifaceted, and ever-changing. In short, it's complicated. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Franklin Foer is a staff writer at The Atlantic and a native Washingtonian. For 7 years, he was editor of The New Republic. He has written several books, including The Last Politician, Inside Joe Biden's White House, and The Struggle for America's Future, which was a New York Times bestseller. He also wrote the book, which I know this one is definitely Michael Brenner's favorite, How Soccer Explains the World, an unlikely theory of globalization, which has been translated into 29 languages. He has won a National Jewish Book Award and the Premio Terzani. But it was Foer's 2024 Tour de Force Atlantic article entitled The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending that catalyzed a public reckoning throughout the American Jewish community. Foer shares his thoughts with us tonight on the diaspora blues. Where do American Jews go from here? He will then be joined by novelist Joshua Cohen, who will give a response to Foer's talk and then engage him in conversation. Cohen is an award-winning novelist who received the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction for his novel, The Netanyahus. He has been called a major American writer by the New York Times, and the New Yorker lauded him as, quote, an extraordinary prose stylist, surely one of the most prodigious at work in American fiction today. Cohen has published several other novels, a collection of stories, and a collection of essays. He was named one of Granta's best young American novelists, and in addition to the Pulitzer, his awards include Israel's Matanel Prize and the National Jewish Book Award in the US. It is an honor to host both of you here tonight. So Frank, we'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. First, props to AU for deepening your relationship with Hebrew University at a moment when BDS is, and just the academic isolation of Israel is becoming so much a prominent fact of American in global intellectual life. I think just even as a matter of kind of liberalism and commitment to academic openness, that's a big deal. So congrats. Thank you. I'd say there are kind of three stages of keynoting an address about Israel. The first is acceptance, when you say, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Then there's grieving, when you're like, why the hell did I agree to give a keynote about Israel? And then finally there's denial, where you're like, okay, everybody's gonna love what I have to say. But I looked up keynote in the thesaurus before I came, and it said deadly, which is why I would so much rather just kibitz with Joshua Cohen, who really is, he's a golden age of American Jewry writer out of the golden age. And we worked together on, I think, what is my proudest project, which Lauren didn't mention, which is an anthology called Jewish Jocks, an Unorthodox Hall of Fame, which I'm extremely proud of. Really, I'm grateful to be able to just talk, because we're at this moment where the war has ended. I think we've come out of this period, and I know that I kind of always had the hope that as soon as the war was over, the situation for American Jews would change. And I'm sure that that was kind of willful optimism on my part. Obviously, Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson are determined to prove that I'm a facile thinker for believing that optimism about the American Jewish condition was possible. But it does feel like we're in a moment right now where it's possible to kind of just think about what comes next. One of the most dangerous things I think you could do is just stand up and riff about Israel, because probably nothing good can come of it. But that's kind of what I want to do tonight. And just reflect a little bit at first about the lessons of the last couple of years, and then try to think about what that means going forward. And I was kind of thinking back to the winter of 2023, and I had on my brain that I should do something about anti-Semitism, because there was a lot that was out there, but it didn't feel especially urgent to me at that moment. It felt like it was something that was relatively remote. And I remember having a conversation with my brother, who's more observant than I am, which I think meant that he was kind of closer to anti-Semitism than somebody who doesn't wear a yarmulke. And I was having this conversation with him where I was like, I know it's out there, but I just haven't experienced it really myself. And he said, well, here in Boston, things are a little bit different. There was a mapping project where pro-Palestinian groups had kind of created this topography of Boston Jewry that included day schools and nursery schools and synagogues, and identified them as all parts of the Israeli war machine, which was something that felt menacing. And his in-laws, Shtibel, the little synagogue in Westchester, had been shot up with a BB gun. And there was kind of a series of things that he pointed me in the direction of that felt kind of intimate to him, but it made me think, okay, I should do something about this. And then I dawdled and really didn't do anything about the subject. And then October 7th hit. And I think that was the moment where I think for a lot of American Jews, anti-Semitism, which was always something that had felt vestigial or something that had felt remote, suddenly felt like it was crowding into these spaces that we existed in. I live like a mile and a half from here, not even. I see many of my neighbors who are here in the audience. And at the foot of Newark Street, on the electric box, somebody had graffitied that the IOF was the same as the KKK. IOF is the Israeli occupying force, not the Israeli defense force, which was this kind of equation that was like staring me at the face every time I walked down the street. And then on the bridge going over Connecticut Avenue, you couldn't, there were from the river to the sea stickers kind of there for a very prominent period of time. It was impossible to miss what was happening. And then I think part of the reason that college campuses stung so much was because college campuses had been this great site for the American Jewish experience, where college campuses had been the site of exclusion for so many years. The whole college application process was set up by Nicholas Murray Butler at Columbia in order to keep Jews out. The idea of the well-rounded applicant was done to exclude guys from Brooklyn named Irving. The whole idea that it was more than just grades, you had to have an essay, you had to be this genteel person, it was done to keep the Jews out. And then the fact that we succeeded and flourished in the American Academy for so long, I think consciously and subconsciously was incredibly important to the way that Jews thought of themselves as Americans, and it was a good sign of triumph. And so the fact that anti-Semitism was creeping into college campuses was something that I think felt so much more poignant to us than maybe even it actually existed. You know, if it existed kind of at a fraction of what we imagined it to be, it still would have been psychologically incredibly wounding to us as Jews. Now, I believe what happened after October 7th and what's continuing to happen to a certain extent was a long time coming. That it was not just the product of what happened during the war, it was the culmination of forces within American politics that had been roiling for a long time. That the 21st century was a period of crisis, and you could see on both the left and the right, for very different reasons, kind of Jews assuming this traditional role that they'd always assumed as the fall guy and taking the blame. So if it was a migration crisis, it was George Soros who was to blame. We could see this even during COVID, if you looked at the message boards, that Jews were to blame for this mysterious virus, where the elites were shutting down society for reasons that a lot of people couldn't comprehend. And, you know, I've been thinking, and also on the left, I think it's important to note that there was a strategy that the kind of pro-Palestinian movement had engaged in order to put American Jews, especially, in a very uncomfortable position, where the whole idea of BDS, the whole idea of turning Israel into a pariah, was meant to apply pressure on institutions and on individuals to make a choice, that it was either you are not boycotted, and which means that you have to distance yourself in some meaningful way from Israeli institutions and Israeli academics and Israeli cello players or what have you, and that produced a climate on the left that was ultimately inhospitable to Jews. My daughter experienced this. She was part of the Sunrise Movement in Washington, D.C., which was a climate justice movement. And there was a certain point where Sunrise Movement said, we won't participate in coalitions with, I think it was the Jewish Women's Democratic Coalition or some crunchy TiVo wearing, no apologies to anybody in the audience if they're part of this, but it was like the most progressive group that you could imagine suddenly weren't allowed to participate in left-wing politics because they refused to condemn the state of Israel, which is crazy and anti-Semitic. As the war has rolled along, I think my analysis has changed slightly. It's not that I believe everything I just said is true, that the domestic forces propelling anti-Semitism are real, that the Palestinian strategy was successful and propelled a lot of what we've seen on campuses and public life. That's all true. And the reality is this. It's like what happens in Israel actually does have consequences for us as American Jews, that we are deeply interconnected as a people. I mean, maybe that is, what it means to be part of a people. is that in the end, we're connected, that is a lesson of biblical Judaism, of classical Zionism, of the history of anti-Semitic persecution in the world, is that there's kind of this inseparability of us, and we don't necessarily have a choice about that. One of the things I think is, and that's maybe grown with time, that in a globalized world, the whole point of globalization is interconnection, where things start to feel, even though we're all interconnected at scale, everything starts to feel smaller and more intimate and more immediate. So that's what happens because of social media. That's what happens when we have the capacity to access information on the other side of the planet. And one of the lessons of what we've seen with each conflict that's occurred in Israel and Gaza over the 21st century is that there's been a spike in anti-Semitism, that it plateaus. So after each incident, after each skirmish, each war, anti-Semitism goes to a different level, and then it settles down for a little bit, and then there's another conflict, and it plateaus at an even higher level than it had been before. And so I think that it's not to I don't want to blame for an instant Israel for anti-Semitism, because anti-Semites are anti-Semites for reasons that have nothing to do with this. But there is a political reality, though, of this interconnectedness. And I think it has implications for American Jews, that there are some Jews who have the instinct that they can kind of slink away from Israel. And that it's like that there is this messiness there that they want nothing to do with. And so we see this on college campuses where the social costs for being Jewish are just too high for a lot of kids. They may not have necessarily the kind of the thick Jewish connections that kind of propel them in the direction of strong identification. And when they see that, participating in the gardening club requires renouncing Israel or accepting like some form of anti-Zionism, they just kind of, they make a decision that, okay, this is just not worth it. I'm going to go along. In a way, it's kind of a more pernicious form of the classical American experience of assimilation. And then there are other people who kind of just take it for granted, whose love for Israel kind of points them in a direction of unconditional love and solidarity, and that's a totally acceptable position. But I think that knowing that we are deeply interconnected, knowing that the fate of American Jewry is tied up to a certain extent with what happens in Israel, I think that it maybe points us in a direction where, as opposed to kind of sitting on the sidelines, that our Zionism should compel us to be actively more involved in kind of thinking about Israel, modeling for the people around us how it's possible when we have disagreements with Israel, that it's possible to express those disagreements in a way that doesn't undermine the legitimacy of the entire enterprise, that doesn't engage in anti-Semitic tropes and the like. Lauren talked about the ways in which American Jews and Israelis are kind of from different planets, from Mars and Venus, to use the classic. And I think that is true to a very large extent, that American Jews are kind of, we live in the country that experienced emancipation in its most pure form. That America, up until very recently, was a place where you would say that liberalism delivered on its ultimate promise, where you could be a Jew, you could identify as a Jew without having to sacrifice your identity at all. And Israel is like, Zionism is a rejection of the promise of emancipation, because emancipation wasn't working when Zionism was created. And I think that as American Jews, we need to. We're at a moment where it's entirely possible that American Jews kind of run away from their historic allegiances to small L liberalism, that there are a lot of people who are tempted by other political movements and other political forces. But I would argue that that the liberalism that American Jews have exuded, have believed in, that they've used as a power to reshape this country, has been one of our great contributions to the world. It's created an America that has been exceptional in many respects, and it's been good for Jews. It's allowed us to flourish in this country. And I think that rather than turning away from liberalism right now, looking at all of the scary forces in front of us here in this country, up against us from both the left and the right, I think it's incumbent on American Jews to find a way through, to find a way to reinvent kind of our understanding of liberalism so that it becomes as politically powerful now as it was in the 1950s when it was used to kind of help nurture this golden age of American Jewry. I think American Jews have been reluctant sometimes to kind of press their liberalism in service of their Zionism. But I think that given that Israel itself is facing various authoritarian threats as well from within, I think it's in the spirit of American Jewry, one of our contributions to the flourishing and survival of Israel is kind of understanding what Israel is, but also helping press to preserve democracy within Israel. When I look at what's happening right now at this very moment as it relates to freedom of press in Israel, or when I follow the case of the woman who was investigating torture, I mean, it's kind of predictable, but also sad to me that her leaking of information becomes the scandal when the information itself that she had is not the scandal. And I think American Jews, to a certain extent, have been, because we're also haunted by, I think, our own feelings of inauthenticity as American Jews, that there's something about being Israeli that feels kind of more authentic to us at times. I think that there's a way in which we, and because Israel is genuinely under threat for most of its history, I think that there are periods where we allow ourselves to kind of sit idly by when we wish we were saying more. And so I think that it's a moment that's incredibly terrifying. There are actually enormous opportunities for Israel right now. That Israel walked out of this war in a way which it has kind of regional dominance in a way that it never had before. That Iran, which sponsors the most fundamental threats to Israel, has been neutralized. There's an American president who's a threat to American democracy, but who also believes in who's making noises now, whether he will ever follow through on them or not, that's another matter, but who's kind of revived the possibilities for talking about a structure that leads to a two-state solution. There are reasons to actually feel optimistic about some of the possibilities that have been presented to Israel. I think our future right now in this country has an unbelievably bleak cast on it because of the threats that we face from both the left and the right. But one of the things that we can do as Jews is model the liberalism that has been our good fortune to enjoy. So whether it's conducting debates and having disagreements, even with ourselves, I think it's important to show that it is possible to have arguments, to render criticisms, to do it in a spirit of love and of kindness and of intellectual agreement with disagreement with an eye towards creating something better, and we can do that in this context that matters to us so deeply. And that in a moment of bleakness, I think, is what I see as a flicker of hope. I'm ready to talk to Joshua because I've been blaring on. I've probably taken my argument in some stupid, dangerous direction that I did not see, but thank you.
I'm responding to, I had an outline of the talk, so I'm gonna like respond,
So did I.
And respond in real time. Yeah. But then I wrote something a little bit, because it's always good to respond to something you don't know it exists. And I'm gonna read it because you're very good at this. So can you hear me? This is, and I'm a novelist, I should say. So I don't know anything. I've been asked this evening to provide a response to Frank's excellent talk, and I'm afraid my response is quite Goyish. I agree. I agree. Or to quote When Harry Met Sally, that great relic of what Frank has called the golden age of American Jewry in the Atlantic, you're right. I know you're right. Carrie Fisher repeats this line throughout the Rob Reiner, Nora Ephron film. And for some reason, whenever I'm reminded of that film, and even whenever I'm passing by Katz's on Ludlow and Houston, I think of that line first, and only after do I remember Meg Ryan's faked orgasm. You're right. I know you're right. Why I like this statement is that implicit in the repetition is a fundamental and yet. You're right, but. You're right, though. I know you're right, however. The repetition does the work of the dissent, but it's a soft dissent. It's a sad and almost wistful disagreement. It's a melancholic and defeatist acknowledgement that one can't help oneself, or that some things cannot be helped. You are right, and yet I, or the world, will continue along on the wrong path until the inevitably erroneous conclusion. You're right, I know you're right, can also be a method of negotiation. I'll concede you this, but you concede me that. You return the living hostages, and we'll release some living prisoners. You return the dead hostages, and we'll release some dead prisoners. We Jews have been more successful at making these deals in an extrinsic form. Or to put it another way, the Israeli government has done better negotiating with Hamas than it has negotiating with the Kaplan protesters and the domestic opposition, not to mention with pro-democratic and anti-occupation American Jewry. We negotiate better with the enemies who have slaughtered us than with ourselves. You're right. I know you're right. It's Carrie Fisher, for anyone who forgot, Lisa Jane Persky, and Meg Ryan talking about men and marriage in Central Park. But now let's talk about another brunch, an even more famous brunch from Talmud. I'm sure you know this Talmudic brunch. I'm sure you know it better than I do. A rich man had a friend and an enemy. His friend was named Kamsa, and his enemy was named Bar Kamsa. It could be, according to the Marhasha, that they were related, but that's besides the point. Anyway, the rich man puts on a feast, and he tells his servant to invite Kamsa. The servant goes, and because it's so hard to find good help, even back then, he invites Bar Kamsa instead. At the feast, the rich man sees his enemy, Bar Kamsa, sitting there at the table amid the wine and piles of delicacies, and says, basically, what the hell are you doing here? Leave. Bar Kamsa is embarrassed. He says, well, because I'm already here, let me stay, and I'll pay for whatever I eat and drink. The rich man won't accept this. Get out of here, he says. But Bar Kamsa persists, thinking that negotiation is still possible, and offers to pay for half of the cost of the feast. The rich man, again, refuses. Out now, he says. Bar Kamsa, now burning with humiliation, says, okay, you know what? If you let me stay, I'll pay all the costs of the feast. At this, the rich man takes Bar Kamsa by the arm and forcibly ejects him, in the presence of all the rabbis who fail to intervene. Bar Kamsa, thrown out, reports to the king, reports to the emperor, conspires to frame and blackmail the Kohanim in the temple, and so begins the war against the Romans. We find this in Gittin Nun Zayin. Due to the humiliation and shame of Bar Kamsa, the temple in Jerusalem were destroyed. So ends the greatest tale of Jewish cancellation. I bring up this famous story only to give voice to the consequences of excluding voices from our tables. Every voice that is excluded finds an audience and a haven with a greater enemy. This is the design of Jewish history. What Frank has spoken about is the situation of the American Bar Kamsa, whose seats at the tables of the American left and the American right, and of the Israeli mainstream, are in question, despite our repeated offers to pay for the banquet, and will pay with our money, not with Qatar's. 2 days from now, there will be another rich man's feast, this one here in Washington, when Mohammed bin Salman visits for the first time since 2018 to discuss a security pact and a defense deal with the Trump administration, and probably also the many gilded developments the Saudis are planning to build with the Trump organization. The Israelis have lost a seat at that table, the seat that Netanyahu had been promising up until October 6th. Netanyahu is the Bar Kamsa of the Saudis. I could go on, but I don't want to depress anyone further. We have cookies and coffee to feast on, and the security guards that are now necessary for an event like this have to go home at some point. I will close only by saying that I too cherish the dream of two states, a crazy dream, but a dream only slightly crazier today than the dream of a Jewish state was in 1940. You're right, I know you're right.
I'll have what he's having.
I can do the noises.
Save it for the coffee.
Okay.
Right, they're very good cookies. Wow. Thank you so much, both of you. I kind of want to be a fly on the wall when you have coffee sometime planning your next book together. So there was a front page of the New York Times that I saved. I'm one of the only people I know who still gets the paper, and I actually do clippings from it. And there's a full page from, I think it was around November of 2023. And it was in the Voice of American Jews, and it said something like, I'm just going from memory, in huge letters, "It hurts so much. These are the people I marched with." And that just really just killed me, because I know, like many people in this room, I was brought up with all of the tales of Jewish involvement in the civil rights struggle, and all of the struggles and all of the liberalism that Frank's talking about, and left of that. So I feel like, even though you've really made this case for things to worry about on both sides, anti-Semitism and more coming from the right and the left, it feels like it hurts more coming from the left. No matter what our personal politics are. So I just wanted both of you to comment on, feel free to disagree with that, but.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, I think that because of Henry Ford and Father Coughlin and the whole rich history of right-wing anti-Semitism, not that there wasn't a history of left-wing anti-Semitism as well, but I think in the mythology of American Jewry, the idea of Heschel and King locking arms, and Goodwin, Schwerner, and Cheney, and et cetera, that there is something about, in the way that college campuses kind of, for us, matter more, I think when you have kind of alliances that get built up over time and they end up not quite turning out the way that you expect, inevitably that's going to sting greater.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, a part of me wants to agree, because I'm in that mood right now of agreeing. I don't know. It's a rare mood for me. Does it hurt more from the left? I mean, to go through socialism again, but a Judenrein socialism, like, I don't know. Yeah, it feels like watching the same old movie again. But I think what causes me, when you say it hurts more, I think what hurts is that there's no room for culture in all of it. You know, it's like if it comes from the left, it comes from
Says
the
the
right.
novelist.
Yeah, well, I mean, it feels that way. It feels that, you know, I didn't want to be political. I didn't want to be speaking about politics at a conference. I'm a novelist, and it feels like I increasingly have to speak about politics just to kind of clear some ground for a book I want to write. And the book, I think, tries to deal with, you know, the books I don't want to make claims for my books, but the books I read and the books I love try to clear the ground of these politics and try to find some essential beauty and ethics that we all can depart from. And so I think that it hurts from every side because everything has become so politicized that I think we've lost the stem of our culture.
Yeah, you can't hide from it. And scientists and people in all fields, I think, are finding.
I think that, I mean, that's why BDS fundamentally sucks, right? Is that it's like that the whole idea is that there can't be some sort of shared space where I could talk to you as a philosopher or a mathematician or a chemist without politics crowding in and shutting down whatever else exists in the world.
Right, and of all the triumphs of you know, critical theory, whether you want to blame it on the Frankfurt Jews or blame it on the French perverting the Frankfurt Jews or whatever, you know, of all of its depredations is the idea that every act is, you know, de facto political, right? And that it's impossible to, you know, choose a product in a supermarket without it being a political choice. It's impossible to, you know, sitting and reading a novel that's pure escapism is a political choice. And I think that it's been so successfully ingrained through various campaigns of fear into the lives of people whose imaginations have not been formed enough necessarily to be able to allow themselves spaces to dream, that I think has been probably the most pernicious effect of the politicization of our discourse. I mean, politics come to kids at the age when they should be reading stories.
Can I just say, well, it's like it's not even it's even true with, to an extent, with politics as well. That type of crowding out. I mean, I mean, which sounds kind of tautological, but it is true. It's that even in politics, the idea. I mean, what you're describing is the polarization where everything is either you're on the team of the angels or the team of the devils, and there's no space in between, which is why everything gets ground up and into this reductionist machine. And of course, that is true for any thoughts that we might have about the world that you would describe as political as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to hold you to the title of your talk, Frank. You may regret that, since you end with, you know, where
what was my title again?
I know. The beginning is the great part, the diaspora blues, but the after the colon part is where do American Jews go from here? So something that has really struck me over the last couple of years is the feeling of American Jews being sort of politically orphaned. You know, historically, certainly since 1932, since the election of 32, American Jews are overwhelmingly vote in, at least in national elections, for the Democratic Party. Often, even when they vote in local elections for more conservative candidates, they still support, you know, generally liberal causes. Tomorrow, one of our speakers is the person who's mostly responsible for polling American Jews for the Pew Research Foundation. So when you see cited, you know, the Pew found this in 2020, she's the person who did all of these surveys. And so that's the profile that most people are used to, with some exceptions: Haredim, Soviet Jews, especially first-generation Soviet Jews. And then, you know, in recent years, with Trump's intercession in Israel, but also the rise of encampments and college campuses and all of, you know, I don't need to tell anyone in this room what's been going on, and then being bounced back and forth like a tennis ball with anti-Semitism, open, really overt, what Tucker Carlson is doing and what we're seeing on the left. Where do American Jews go from here politically?
I'm not sure I have the answer to that.
Not
but I
gonna
think-
hold
I
you
think
to it.
I think that it's totally plausible for me to imagine that in the next Democratic primary, that the question of do you support military aid for Israel will be a litmus test question in terms of validating how pure somebody is, and that some of the hottest debates in that primary are going to be over Israel. And I think it's going to be very uncomfortable for American Jews, because the truth is, even if we agree with a lot of these critiques sometimes, that the way that they get expressed tend almost inevitably to take on a cast that, like, if not overtly anti-Semitic, kind of moves uncomfortably in that direction. Now, I can only speak about myself personally, which is that my values are my values, and that's kind of the most important, more than any sort of partisan badge one wears. Like, I don't see my own political self being transformed just because the atmosphere has changed. But I do think that for one of the anomalies of American Jewish life, there was a sociologist, Milton Himmelfarb, who came up with this crack about how Jews live like Episcopalians but vote like Puerto Ricans. And so, like, I can imagine that there are a lot of American Jews who are going to migrate to the right, not just because of Israel, but because of economic self-interest, because there's only so long a sociological anomaly can persist.
I think that would have happened a long time ago if it was for economic self-interest. The problem is that when you start migrating to the right, and then prominent figures on the right refuse to disavow, the hate speech, where do you go? Where do you go from here, Joshua?
I'm going back to New York. A couple hours. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
New York's interesting these days.
Sure. I have a couple answers to that question. I think the first one is, what's your time scale, right? I mean, if you're dealing with a generational time scale with a near 70% intermarriage rate, you're inching toward extinction, and so it doesn't really matter. The Jews have lost the numbers game in general. There are very, very few of us, and we're not having babies like we used to.
You must be great to have at a party.
You want me to lie to you? I'll lie to you. Everything's fucking great. I mean, I don't know what to say, but I mean, like, I think first of all, you're looking at, we always thought the big Jewish delusion is that we were powerful. We weren't powerful. We had a number of people who were very highly placed after an America that was very successful and coming out of the Second World War, kind of, with the delusion at least of running the free world, the Western world. And there were a lot of people who were placed in positions of power and had economic leverage to essentially exaggerate the myth of Jewish power to Jews. The truth is, we're not many people. The money that we have all together is even not that much money, and we're dropping the American bucket. We're not important electorally. When you even have, when you have the entire Satmar community in Williamsburg voting for Mamdani, that can already tell you that, right. So I think that so my first thing is probably, hurtling toward extinction. On one hand. I think the second thing, though, is about where we go from here. I think it's really important, at least for me personally, to ask, what do I want to save? What is worth saving? Because, I mean, is an authoritarian, fascist, religious Israel worth saving? Because there are a few people there I like. Is this country with this, the erosion of democratic norms and anti-Semitism abounding worth saving? Is Jewish literacy in the age of the screen worth saving? I think that, in a lot of ways, we have to really be very clear about what we want to save and what we're going to put our resources and attention into saving. And I think that's what's unclear is this idea of, Jews are under threat. Well, what does that mean? Jews are under threat or Israel is under threat. Who's Israel? Which Jews? And I think that then all of this breaks down. So for me, I think that I'm content to think of, the things I can control and the worlds and the people whom I care about. I don't think at all that those people or those ideas are representative or what most people's ideas of what Jewish values are. And so, the idea of where we go from here, I think, is about what we decide our self-definition is. You know.
No, go ahead. I'll think of a response.
Okay. Okay. Well.
I mean, one thing I wanted to speak.
He'll respond to himself.
Yeah, I'm responding to myself. I mean, I was thinking, I was, on one hand,
Now the rebuttal comes.
Yeah.
It's good.
No. Look, one thing I wanted to think about. I mean, these two headlines that were in the Israeli press in the same day, and they were right above each other. It's the duo that we all love. It's Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And one headline was Smotrich announces 0% income tax on New Olim, right? So you just come on in. We're not going to tax you. Just, right? And then right under that is the new death penalty bill that Ben Gvir is trying to push through, right? And it's just like, do I want to live in a tax haven country that puts all of my perceived enemies to death? I don't know, but it's like, it's very difficult to look at what these, headlines are out of Israel and figure out, what is the Israel I want to save, and what is the American Jewish experience that I want to save? And it feels like both of those things, at least in terms of the Israel that I care about and the American Jewish experience that I care about, are obviously parts of both that most people don't care about. And so I feel like a minority within the minority.
Which is not an unfamiliar feeling. Both of you are talking about these really existential identity crises that the communities in both Israel and America are facing, but that are destined, it seems, to bring those communities farther and farther apart from each other. It appears that the numbers game, but also the people who are at the top ideologically are much farther from each other in the American Jewish community and in Israel than they ever have been. Thinking about the slogan of when I was little and we used to participate in these UJA walkathons, and it was walk a day for UJA, still have the buttons, and the slogan over it was "We are one," and that's in many ways broken now. And Frank, I think you were talking sort of wistfully, aspirationally about being "We are one," but if you're talking about Israel and America, where, as Michael pointed out at the beginning, the bulk of the world's Jews now live, if they are moving so far apart that we're not one anymore, that has enormous ramifications, and it's very, very sad. So
yeah, I mean, we probably never were one, right? That there were always divisions, but there was a oneness, right? I guess I do accept that is the case, and I think that. There's a question, there's a choice in the matter, maybe to some extent, but then there's also just kind of the harsh realism of the world in which, the world thinks of us basically as one, and that explains a lot of what's happening in the world, where Chinese restaurants don't get their windows smashed because of what the Chinese government does in Xinjiang. It's only restaurants in San Francisco and Brooklyn that are owned by Israeli Americans where that happens, and so there's kind of an inescapability, I think, to a certain extent. I mean, I agree with what your fundamental question about thinking through, what is the project? What is it that we care about preserving? But there are certain things that we can't help but be stuck with as part of our fate as well.
Which is usually not religious. Which is funny because that's the rest of the world thinks of the Jews as a religious group. And those of us in academia are often approached by people saying, "Oh, the other faith communities," and I always think that strikes me as very odd. But maybe being stuck in that room. I'm thinking about the end of Sartre's play No Exit, We Close, when they're sitting in a room and they can't close their eyes and they're stuck with each other. It's also the end of Seinfeld. That they're riffing off of that. And what is, the pessimistic read on it is, what is hell? They're in hell. What is hell? Other people. So, but the perhaps optimistic twist on that is that eventually, if you're stuck together, if the rest of the world is forcing you together long enough, you're going to have to find some ground and have to reach deep within and find those things that caused you to be a community in the first place. And I do think that those still exist, despite the intermarriage rate that you're citing, Joshua, and other things. Is that possible?
Sure. I don't know. I mean, I think that, we are one was what, the official kind of Zionist propaganda line screamed here and in Israel. And you are one was what the anti-Semites screamed. And actual Jews were just in the middle, getting screamed at from one ear, we are one, and screamed at from the other ear, you are one. And everyone's kind of trembling in the middle, feeling like they contain multitudes. So I really doubt, these nation-building concepts, right, which really undergirded, the Israeli identity. Also played a role here to unite these Jewish communities. And so we think about nation building in the context of Zionism and early Zionism. You take, a bunch of, people from freezing cold places and a bunch of people from really hot places who speak all different languages, and you stick them together in a tent in the middle of nowhere. And like you tell them you're the same people, and they're like, okay. And then after a while, they start marrying each other, and it's nice. And you get rid of genetic diseases, hopefully. You develop other ones, but it doesn't matter. But the thing is that was the nation building project in Israel. But at the same time, there was a nation-building project among American Jews, right? Because, my parents and grandparents came to the U.S. a little too late for this, but, knowing the history of American Jewry, it's, the uptown Jews won't talk to the downtown Jews. The Germans are not going to go downtown and marry anyone from, from the Pale Settlement. But there was, after the Second World War and with the creation of the State of Israel, a concomitant desire to essentially build the idea of American Jewry, which was a single block. And because we didn't have a state around it, or we did have a state, it was just called New York, but we didn't have a state really around it, an official state with an official flag and a nice song and a different language. Because we didn't have that, it didn't seem like a nation-building project. But in retrospect, it really does feel like a nation-building project that was performed at the same level of finesse as the Zionist project.
Right. Well, the whole when Louis Brandeis talked about Zionism, the idea was that it would make us more American because we would have a homeland just like every other ethnic group. But I'm also reminded, Joshua Leifers in the audience, who has a wonderful book, Shattered Tablets, which is kind of about this whole experience. And one of the things that he writes about, I have a friend who had whose daughter was having a bat mitzvah, and he said the theme of tonight's bat mitzvah is Judaism. And I was like, given that I went to my first bat mitzvah I went to in Washington, D.C. had a Gone with the Wind theme, which is like, that's a subject for, you could borrow it for your next novel. I do think that is kind of our, for me at least, like that is, like, what is being Jewish if not having a canon of text and ethics, liturgy, of rituals, of prayer, and that really as a people, if that isn't the thing that's kind of ultimately in the end at the center of it all, then kind of what are we?
No, I agree with that. I wanted to point out that we're all, to one degree or another, whether through a really explicit Israeli process or a more implicit American Jewish process, we've all been the victims. We're all the products of a great homogenization, right? Where we all came from really, really serious particularisms, really serious parochialisms. I mean, going back only 2 generations in my family, you know, it's as parochial as like the difference from like one village to another, or one village to a capital. And the idea that like, you know, that these, you know, Jews from Transylvania have anything in common with these, you know, Jews from Berlin is crazy, let alone Jews from the Maghreb or whatever. And so we're very, very, very close to this colossal epochal process of homogenization where we were extruded through the 20th century as if through like some sausage making machine. And we were all
Not a sausage making machine for us, Pib.
Yeah, well, you know, but I mean, you know, but I still think that a lot of our anxieties and our truly founded neuroses as a people come from this process of homogenization where we became Jews with a capital J that are supposedly one, when in fact we, you know, we were very many different things.
Still are. I think of the still flagship art school in Israel, in Jerusalem, the Bezalel School, which was when it was founded in 1906. The founder, Boris Schatz, who himself was from Eastern Europe, decided very affirmatively to do exactly what Joshua is saying, to create what at the time was called a Palestinian art, which meant Jews in Israel, in Free State Israel, in the Yishuv, and he very, very consciously, purposefully took elements from European modernism and from the Eastern European artists who were moving there, and he got Yemenite silver specialists, and some other Mizrahi artists and artisans, and he said to them, I want you to create something that does not exist anywhere else, and it will be a Palestinian Jewish art. And so that's very, I mean, it still exists. It's a very successful art school, but now in sort of the revisionist history of that art movement in the Yishuv, all kinds of negatives came to light about how certain groups, especially the Mizrahim, were subsumed to the sort of the hegemony of the European artists who were there. And so, yeah, I mean, it is forcing it, but in the end, through much pain and some loss, they did come out with something that didn't exist anywhere else and was unique to the Jews in Israel. I don't think we have an analog in America, with the possible exception of American literature. I have to note that Jonathan Sarna is sitting here in this room, the leading historian of American Jewry, and this is my plug for tomorrow for you all to come back and hear some of the amazing panelists. We have Jonathan, we have the aforementioned Joshua Leifer, who's representing the youth vote here, and Maya Arad and Ruby Namdar, two of the leading Israeli novelists living now in America. We have an amazing lineup. So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
No, it's very hard having Jonathan Sarna sitting here listening to it's a fact checking that's happening. It's excruciating because I know I'm getting it all wrong.
But he's very nice. So
he is a sweet, menschy human being. So there's that to blunt that. No, the idea. I mean, I think what you're describing is a universal human experience, and like Jews don't exist outside of universal human experiences. So it's true, and also I don't think of it as like a particular source of Jewish anxiety or neuroses or exceptionalism.
One more question, then I think we're going to break for book signing and cookies. What do you make of the surge, the so-called, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, is the expression that sort of came to the fore after October 7th, the phenomenon of Jews around the world, but especially American Jews, who had not particularly overtly identified as Jews, suddenly running out and buying Jewish star necklaces and hanging up Israeli flags and things like that. and more, more sort of intellectual identification. Synagogues were full. Hebrew classes began to fill up, and this was all. It has dipped somewhat since then, but sociologists and others gave it a name. It was called the surge. So, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I remember seeing this when I would be in the Bay Area, and I would go to public schools, and I would see the way in which parents who had basically no institutional Jewish connection whatsoever were suddenly kind of spontaneously forming WhatsApp groups and creating spreadsheets, et cetera, to kind of organize because they'd seen anti-Semitism creeping into the classroom of their children. And what was interesting to me was how disconnected a lot of it was from kind of everything. That they existed kind of in their own bubble, that they weren't connected to like the whole alphabet soup of Jewish organizations, and that a lot of organized Jewish communal life wasn't actually seeking them out in order to kind of bottle whatever they were experiencing and translating it into something that was more durable. I think it feels to me both understandable and I do think that there will be a lasting piece of that experience because Jonathan Sarna was making this point to me earlier that the experience of anti-Semitism is something that doesn't really dissipate, and that it will be a foundational experience for a lot of those individuals. I think that there is part of this that I look at where the kind of whole American political discourse about identity was kind of tailor-made for a moment like this, where it feels like everybody else kind of has these opportunities where they've been, oppressed or whatever, victimized, or and the fact that Jews had been kind of excluded from a lot of the academic definitions of what it means to be a minority or what it means to be a group that has a history of persecution. There was something that kind of, when the opportunity came to avail ourselves and to identify with that discourse, it was seized upon.
Jews being cut out of DEI.
What I think about Al-Aqsa surge, which is what I call it. If you have a flood, you need a surge. I don't know. It sounded good. It sounded like some McKinsey guy just came up with it. I don't know. It doesn't seem real. I think that there's a deep mystic. This is where I become, religious. I don't know what the word is. Something. There's a deep and there's this deeply strange homeostasis in Jewish life, and it's very difficult for me to wrap my head around that. That basically the number of new olim to Israel after the 7th of October is almost to the man equal to the number of people who have left Israel or have actually canceled their toshavut and left. So that it's like the universe trying to maintain its balance. So sure, is there a surge in Jewish life in the United States? Sure. Is there a surge in Israelis trying to, speculating on the Greek property market? Sure. Like getting out and going to different cities, and trying to build new lives because they can't see their future, their children's future in Israel. Sure. So I think, we're living in a time where everything is surging, and it's all surging at once. And I think that our, greatest myopia as American Jews is only to see the phenomenon as it relates to us in a vacuum, and not understand that these things are intimately connected. When we want to fly there, they want to flee here. And this is, this isn't a deep thought. This was the first sketch on Eretz Nehederet last week. So I think that the idea of being attuned to everyone surging everywhere at once is part of the contemporary condition.
Well, thank you for bringing us back to our theme of American Jews and Israel. And
Turns out it's complicated.
turns out it's complicated. So just one last word here. One of the themes, one of the slogans that has come out of here, have come out of the developments in this country of the surge is as Jewish joy. You hear this slogan a lot of places, Jewish joy, engage in Jewish joy. So for us at the moment, even though it's a little bit angsty version, it includes these kind of intellectual exchanges that we've been so privileged to listen to, and of course followed by cookies. So please join us outside. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. And we have book signing, and sales in the room on the other side of that wall. See you, I hope, tomorrow.